Shame and the other lookouts on the rooftop reported that thousands of soldiers were gathered in Warsaw, setting up camp like we were the new front line of the war. And maybe we were. It suddenly made sense why the Germans waited this long. It took time to organize an army of this size. Extensive planning to prepare a ghetto of 70,000 people for total liquidation. No doubt those were the orders. By 6 o'clock, they had the ghetto surrounded. Our day had been spent hastily moving the last of our supplies into the bunkers and helping people get to their assigned places. I crowded into a bunker with Yitzhak, Esther, and Tamir, and at least a dozen other fighters. We were all tense, wanting to move, to race, to test our strength and courage against the invaders. I'd already faced them dozens of times when entering the ghettos. Very soon, I would face them again, but in an entirely different way. It was the evening before Passover, and the tension was so thick throughout the ghetto, every move I made seemed to require me to push myself through solid air. As important as it was every year to observe Passover, I couldn't think of any other night of my life when we needed God to save us more. Our bunker would hold the Seder. Every bunker would hold it. Someone had located a white tablecloth for ours, and we gathered around it. The same women who had worked tirelessly making food for the bunkers pushed themselves yet again to bake matzo and hard-boiled the eggs. And some of the men provided wine. It wasn't a complete meal, but what we had was kosher, and it reminded me of the sacred nature of the Last Supper with Akiva. How long ago that seemed now. This was my second Last Supper. I didn't expect to ever celebrate a third. An elderly man behind me whispered, almost under his breath, something in Yiddish, which is Yiddish for, on our lives, on our deaths. Those who heard him quietly repeated the words as a vow. Another pledge of honor. I said it too, and felt my courage rise. Tamir read from the Haggadah. As I sipped from my wine glass, listening to the recitation of God's deliverance of the Israelites from bondage in Egypt, I couldn't help but wonder if he would deliver us now. Tamir answered my unspoken question, perhaps the question no one dared to ask. Didn't Moses once say to our people, "Be strong and courageous. God is the one who goes with you." My friend, if we do not see the end tomorrow, then know that we have fought for deliverance of others. If our deaths give the chance of life to others, we have done well. The rest of the group moved on with the Seder, but my thoughts remained there. Tamir sat nearly across from me, giving praise and honor to a God who might not save him from his fate, but he did so confident that this coming fight was worthy of God's blessing. My mind returned to the small apartment in Lodz, where Abraham and Henrik and Sarah believed that their death was to honor God. I understood that now. The resistance was not about who lived and who died. It was about the way we lived and the way we would die when our time came, which might be sooner than any of us wanted. Near the close of the meal, someone behind me mumbled, "Tonight will not be a good night." If other words were spoken afterward, I didn't hear them. We huddled in close together, all of us pretending to sleep and no one doing a particularly good job of it. Time crawled forward without mercy, each minute an hour, each hour a lifetime. And yet it felt as if I'd only blinked once, when the boom of a tank's gun echoed above us, so forcefully that bits of dirt crumbled beneath the cracks of the bunker ceiling. It was very early in the morning. Someone called out the time, 2 a.m. Those without weapons had been told to remain in the bunker until an opportunity came to escape into the forests. I didn't know when or how such a thing was to be accomplished, but they could remain in here forever. To the rest of us, Tamir issued the call that was no doubt being given in every ghetto bunker. All armed Jews, the time has come to fight. I looked over at Esther, then at my brother, and found joy in their fixed expressions of determination. We shared a grim smile, grabbed every weapon that had been assigned to us, and followed the others up our narrow ladder. It was exactly 10 months since I had officially joined the resistance, since the day I had promised Gustav Drenger to fight against the Nazi occupation in any way I was needed. Every experience of my life since then had prepared me for what was about to come, and I was ready to be tested. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was about to begin. Chapter 37, April 19th, 1943, Warsaw Ghetto. Esther positioned herself near me on the 3rd floor of a former soup kitchen building overlooking Nalekiv Street. Yitzhak had been assigned elsewhere, which felt like losing him all over again, but this was only the beginning. We were bound to be separated eventually. Below us, a single-file line of SS troops entered the ghetto, their precise march making it difficult to know how many soldiers were there. Maybe 50, or 500, or 5,000. Anything was possible. When the full moon finally emerged from thick clouds, I caught a look at the uniforms, but at this distance I couldn't read their markings, although they definitely did not look German. Tamir passed by to say they were mostly troops from Lithuania and the Ukraine. There was a third group, too, the Jewish police. Beneath my breath I cursed, but it was loud enough for Esther to hear. "I don't speak like that," she scolded. Inwardly I smiled. It was fine that I was waiting to kill as many soldiers as possible, but she would not tolerate my cursing. Tamir heard me as well. The OD had no choice. Those who refused to participate were already shot near the Gestapo building. "And what do these men think will happen to them after this is over?" I countered. Other than the lengthening column of soldiers, the streets below were deserted. They marched past numerous banners and posters. Some called for Poles outside the ghetto to join us in the fighting, others for courage until the end. But my favorite was a poster of 2 hands shaking each other through a break in the ghetto wall, with text reading, "All people are equal brothers, brown, white, black, and yellow." Perhaps one day. Perhaps. While the column advanced, we waited, patiently, silently, my fingers on the trigger, my muscles ready with anticipation. Between Esther and me sat a dozen grenades, a matchbook, and 3 homemade explosives. I also had a few extra rounds of ammunition for my gun. But we did nothing to this initial column of soldiers. These men were only pawns. We awaited the true enemy. At the first hint of dawn, the Germans entered. Perhaps after assuring themselves that since nothing had happened so far, they should be fine too. How wrong they were. I didn't know who was the first to fire on them, nor who gave the order, but once I saw the action start, I was ready. I started with one of the explosives, lighting the fuse inside a bottle filled with petrol, then dropped it from the window on an entire detachment of soldiers. It exploded, bodies fell, and the troops who survived it scattered. Next, members of my team reached for our grenades. For many of them, this was the first live grenade they'd ever thrown, much as it had been for me at the cafe. Esther turned to them now. "Count after you throw, not before." The reminder probably wasn't necessary, but better safe than sorry, I supposed. Esther and I pulled our pins. Her sights were on a group that had already scattered to the far end of the street, and I found a group of soldiers who were aiming their rifles upward towards another building. Both grenades exploded, sending debris high into the air. When it settled, I counted 5 Germans down, either injured or dead. This was a good start, but it wasn't enough. This was not enough, never enough. The words rang through my head. Orders were shouted below for the Germans to retreat, and from nearby, Tamir ordered us to stand down as well. We needed to save our strength for Germans who were advancing, not retreating. Esther and I rolled back against the wall, away from the windows, and my pulse was still racing when Tamir ordered us to gather up our weapons. "They'll target these windows when they return," he said. "Let's move below." He ordered some of my team into the building at street level, but Esther and I were sent down into one of the many tunnels constructed beneath the streets. From here, we could secretly access small holes that allowed us to shoot from almost ground level, or to roll grenades under the feet of the marching soldiers. They wouldn't even know where the bullet that caught them came from. We were barely in place when the soldiers returned again. This time, they weren't in formation, and Tamir was right. They shot wildly at the windows, taking aim anywhere they thought we still were. In return, I fired at targets ahead of me, while Esther rolled at least 3 more grenades at passing troops. We were close enough to the Germans to hear their confused shouts. They did not know where to aim or where we aimed for, resulting in orders to advance shouted out at the same time as orders to retreat or to take cover. The soldiers' reactions were equally confused, panicked, men running or diving to the ground or standing frozen, unsure of which order was meant for them. They hadn't been trained for this, which made me smile. They'd faced down whole armies, conquered countries with blitzkrieg on land, sea, and air. They boasted of their superiority in technology, manpower, in their very race. Yet, for all of that, the Germans were not prepared for us. Within an hour, the Germans retreated a second time, and shouts passed through the streets that they had left the ghetto entirely. Tamir dashed through the tunnels, asking for reports of how many were injured or wounded. With each response, a swell of pride rose within me. "We're fine," I called out, as all of the others had. "Not one," Tamir said, hope thick in his voice. "Not one of us is injured yet. Yet." That single word remained locked in my mind, but for now the victory was ours. "They'll be back," Esther whispered, "twice as strong as before." No, not twice as strong. The Germans would return with 10 times the strength, or more. Tamir and the few other senior leaders crept out onto the streets, after they determined it was safe. They called for the rest of us to come out. I was nervous, remembering what had happened to those in Akiva who were out in the open when the Germans responded to the cafe attack, including my friend Jacob. I was still alive because I knew how to blend into the background and when to hide, but I did not want to see the effects of what we had done, knowing that I might never have another chance for it. Most of the other fighters who emerged wrapped arms around each other with cries of Malstov. If this was only our first scrape, it went far better than any of us could have expected. Then we were hushed and immediately fell silent. From outside the ghetto walls, we heard orders shouted for soldiers to come in and retrieve their injured. We waited, listened, and nothing happened. Nothing happened? How could that be? Those were direct orders. Where were the soldiers who'd been ordered in? Still, there was nothing, and no one. Esther leaned over to me. "They're scared. They won't come in because they're afraid they won't come back out." They were right to be afraid. While we were in full of confidence and pride and feeling for the first time in years that we were no longer victims, but that we controlled our own future, I would remember this moment always, the morning I stood with my fellow resistance fighters to claim our own destiny again.